I can't see a thing, Jim.
Well, hold on.
I swear, it's always some damn thing. Wait, got it. Ah, hell, this thing ain't gonna hold.
Shut up.
Damn, you're ugly.
How do I even begin to talk about Starcraft, the greatest real-time strategy game ever created? In 1998, fresh off the success of both Warcraft 2 and the groundbreaking Diablo, Blizzard Entertainment's third prodigal son was released onto an ecstatic gaming world. The game looked like nothing that had come before it, featuring impressive visuals for its age, excellent voice acting, a soundtrack that rocks out loud, a surprisingly good storyline, and gameplay that reinvented the entire genre. To this day, Starcraft remains one of the most unforgiving and competitive RTS games to ever exist, continuing to dominate the esports scene, beating out even its sequel. To a modern viewer, especially someone young enough not to clearly remember the launch of Starcraft 2, or someone older who was just never big on RTS games to begin with, this must be perplexing. How indeed could this strange, janky, often bullshit game full of cheap rushes and maneuvers possibly have captivated the world as it did? How can a game whose story is barely communicated to the player using canned briefing sequences and map transmissions still have people sharing Aldaris and General Duke memes? Is it really possible for something so absolutely 90s in its presentation and visual style to be timeless? If you're already a Starcraft fan, you know full well the answer to that question is yes, but if you're unfamiliar to this game, I would really like to set the stage for you, as this is only part 1 in a series of videos that will span the entire Starcraft saga. I will be reviewing, one by one, every single mission of Starcraft, Brood War, its 2 unofficial expansion packs, the lost hidden missions, and every single player bonus mission that I can get working. Which means I'll be starting with the demo precursor campaign and ending on the Stukov series maps. Is a game with such a simple story actually worth this kind of intense analysis? I think the answer is yes. In fact, I believe Starcraft has one of the greatest stories ever put into a video game, and is so often overlooked because it doesn't have a novel's worth of text like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, and doesn't have the wide mass appeal of something like Earthbound or Halo. More than that, Starcraft is a triumph of limited storytelling. Every character in the game is memorable, and at least as far as the first game is concerned, the plot is a solid airtight full circle about the death and new life of 3 civilizations. But hopefully you won't just have to take my word for it. I fully encourage you to try the game out for yourself. The official version is currently free to play, but if you are so inclined, StarCraft Remastered is actually decent, and beyond that you can simply download a copy of the game from your choice of site on the high seas. It's technically legal to do so since the game is free now anyway. If you take this route, I recommend the no-install version as it's obviously the easiest to get working. I'd provide you links, but, well, YouTube looks down on that kind of thing. Starcraft began development as far back as 1995, shortly after work on Diablo had begun. I think this is an important point to remember, as I personally believe Diablo heavily influenced the plot and setting of the game, but we'll get there. Initially, Starcraft was to follow in Warcraft 2's footsteps, using the same 2D engine and colorful 16-bit sprites. You can see what such a game might have looked like in these tantalizing screenshots from the long-lost alpha version, which has tragically never been recovered. I really wish somebody involved in the series would just leak this damn thing already. I would love to get my hands on it. Anyway, Starcraft's debut at E3 1996 did not go very well. People felt the game looked primitive and derivative of Blizzard's existing Warcraft 2. It was quickly made fun of as Warcraft in Space and Warcraft Goes Purple. This, combined with a competing RTS game a few booths over called Dominion, Storm over Gift 3, which appeared to have full 3D graphics and utterly blew the pitiful Starcraft demo out of the water, caused Blizzard to withdraw and dramatically retool the game's development. The game's entire art style was reworked into a more realistic, pseudo-3D look reminiscent of the Fallout games and its brother game Diablo. Additionally, Blizzard even went as far as setting up a film department in order to render full-motion 3D cutscenes to give the game some flavor. It's unclear if this trickled down to Diablo or not, as that game also had a few 3D cutscenes, but they may have been done in-house instead of by Blizzard's main office. Whatever the case, it was certainly a step in the right direction. The game's cutscenes ooze personality, even when the stuff they depict deviates a great deal from gameplay. Diablo released in 1997, featuring a special addition to its development. This was Battle.net, a server software hosted by Blizzard that allowed anyone to host and join multiplayer games all across the world. It turned Diablo from an already successful RPG about hunting demons into an even more massive hit, with thousands of players logging in daily to hack and slash their way through dungeons in search of powerful items and riches. Battle.net also breathed new life into the aging Warcraft 2's multiplayer scene. Last I knew, Warcraft 2 still has a thriving multiplayer community. The hype machine went off the rails for Starcraft. There was even a short demo campaign called Precursor, released just before the game would launch, featuring 4 missions, custom voice acting, and a pretty good showcase of what players could expect from the game's proper campaign. Blizzard was king of the world, and when the game launched in 1998, it was an instant smash hit. It seems almost alien now in the far-off year of 2024. The idea that you could believe the hype and the game that got released was not only actually worth your time and money, but also transcended existing games and changed the genre by leaps and bounds. Such a thing is unreal after a decade and a half of disappointment, false promises and loot boxes. But believe it or not, Starcraft was a success. Copies of Starcraft even came with something called Spawn that would allow you to create cut-down versions of the game to hand out to your friends so you could play multiplayer games with them. Before even owning the game, people were hooked on Battle.net. Development of an expansion pack was underway almost immediately. In the meantime, Blizzard's website would release various bonus maps, most of these being multiplayer skirmishes, but there were also some challenge modes for 1 or more players. 2 unofficial expansions, licensed by Blizzard but not written or overseen by anyone on staff, were released by the company Aztec New Media. These were the infamous Starcraft Insurrection and Starcraft Retribution. Both expansions featured janky mechanics, obvious mistakes in map editing, and hilarious voice acting that is just begging for some kind of a cast reunion.
So you called me here for this? Crazy prophet with a bad promo disc? You're losing your touch, Bill.
He might be crazy, Jack, but he's gathered quite a following. And there's more, Jack. Something else we found in the installation. Zerg.
You mean what he was talking about on the disc was...
Yes, Jack.
But that's madness.
Around this time, there was also an unauthorized expansion called Stellar Forces, which is absolutely broken and useless, and the only Starcraft-related thing I will not be reviewing in this series. Maybe I'll do a little showcase video for April Fools sometime, but we'll see. Starcraft Brood War released the same year as its progenitor game, only 9 months later. Brood War featured a lot of quality-of-life updates, tweaks to the gameplay, and new units and abilities for each faction. It also featured a new campaign that, while not quite as good story-wise as the original, is still great in its own right. The missions also became much harder, especially the online bonus campaign Enslavers 2, which I am personally dreading having to review, but at least that one's pretty far away for now. Starcraft also got a release on the Nintendo 64, for some reason. It's apparently an ambitious port but suffers a great deal from awkward controls and slowdown issues. It's sort of a footnote here, but the game did ship with a single bonus map called Resurrection 4, which has since been recreated in the proper game. Resurrection 4 is the final map in a series of bonus missions released through Blizzard's website called the Stukov series, concerning the adventures of a certain character from Brood War after the events of that game. Resurrection 4 is also chronologically the last mission, bonus, unofficial or otherwise, of the original Starcraft, and will be where this series ends whenever that happens. Starcraft's gameplay is fairly straightforward, even if you are not familiar with RTS games in general. Left-click selects a unit or structure. Right-click if issued to a unit is either a move or attack command, depending on what the target is. The target cursor shows green for friendly units, red for hostile, and yellow for allied or neutral units. Commands available to a unit are depicted in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, in something called a command card. You can issue commands by clicking on them in the command card, or you can use the specific hotkey tied to that command to activate it without having to mouse over. Tooltips display the hotkeys if you forget which one is tied to a certain command. From there, most of the game's advanced meta revolves around exploiting the questionable unit pathing or strangely sized hitboxes. There is a small amount of RNG in the game. For instance, enemies behind cover like trees or on higher ground from their attackers have a random chance to ignore a given ranged attack, but this is an overall minor part of the experience. If you want more information on the minutiae, I recommend you check out the channel of Starcraft modder Nekron, link in the description. To be completely honest with you, I am not good at this game. I understand its mechanics, but I was never really able to master using hotkeys for any more than very basic actions. I'm left-handed, but I use a mouse right-handed when I'm on a computer. It's a mess. So when you see me play through these missions, frequently you'll see me using lame or cheap tactics such as infantry spam, mass battlecruisers, save scumming, and so forth. If you're some kind of lifeless nerd who cannot handle the thought of a middling player talking at length about an old video game, I guess you should find another channel. Pronogo apparently disabled the ability to save at all in his Cosmonarchy Total Conversion. You'll probably like his content more, link in the description. I will at the very least play and defeat every single mission without using cheats, which for some of the later missions is definitely going to be brutal at my skill level. I'll also cut out my save scumming so the footage is at least smooth, but for the most part, my gameplay will not be representative of a person who has properly mastered the game. If you would like to get a look at that, I recommend the channels Jabarino, Executor Neural, and the aforementioned Nekron, all of which will be linked in the description below. I have taken the liberty of rendering the entire Starcraft manual's background information in text-to-speech. This was a big undertaking and took me months as I kept running into the character limit on my service of choice, but now at least you can listen to the mountain of background information contained therein rather than having to read it yourself. This will be uploaded at the conclusion of my short series on the demo missions for the game, as the manual contains mild spoilers for those missions. In the meantime, I will give you a short overview of each faction here. The Terrans are a group of former prisoners exiled from Earth by a dystopian one-world government that practiced a futuristic form of eugenics. All mutants, the mentally ill, people with deformities, people exposed to radiation, and people who chose to cybernetically enhance their bodies were rounded up and imprisoned, with most being liquidated. However, a few thousand were selected for a long-term colonization experiment and sent into deep space. The colony ships malfunctioned, bringing these convicts into a far-flung region of space known as the Koprulu sector. From there, the ships crash-landed, with the surviving convicts becoming colonists in this distant region. Several human governments arose after generations of human proliferation, but one, the Terran Confederacy of Man, became dominant due to its intact colony ship and superior technology gleaned from the memory banks. The Confederacy rules with an iron fist, even exterminating one of its colonies, Korhal, that dared rebel against them. The Terran faction is equal parts familiar and downright unsophisticated. Terran technology looks like a blend of dieselpunk and the movie Alien, with lots of pipes, scaffolding, gaskets, bolts and rivets holding rusty metal plating together. The Terrans in personality are quite a bit like rednecks in space and not the Hollywood Joss Whedon redneck face they show on TV. Instead, the Terrans run the full gamut of redneck archetypes. You've of course got the potato-headed weirdos missing most of their teeth, chain-smoking truck drivers, horse-faced farmer's daughter-looking women who are the hottest in their neighborhood because at least they don't weigh 500 pounds, nervous, vaguely ethnic menial laborers who get the job done, and skinny nerds who are more than a little absent-minded and lack a great deal of common sense as the ability to read made them the black sheep of the family. It's not all negative caricatures though. You've also got friendly good old boys who just want to have a beer and grill in peace. The cantankerous old war veteran grandpa who back in his day, men were men and the whole company had to fight with sticks and rocks, and they had to share the rocks. Effortlessly charming flyboys always ready with a joke, badass biker dudes, and that singular anomaly you always find out in the boonies, the sophisticated smooth talker with plans bigger than his head. It's actually sort of impressive how something that's willing to be so outwardly irreverent and caricaturize a whole group of people actually ends up creating a really grounded and realistic snapshot of the people it's making a pastiche of. At times the game seriously feels like some kind of really bizarre King of the Hill sequel that fell off the back of Mike Judge's truck in the 90s.
Got any questions about propane? Or propane accessories?
Needless to say, the Terrans are tons of fun, both to play as and watch in action. Gameplay-wise, their technology is the most standardized, with units that mostly shoot and only a few really weird abilities to master. Terrans also have some of the better single units in the game, such as the Marine, which can rock and roll both on the ground and against air units with ease, or the mighty battlecruiser, 12 of which can routinely clear a map without much trouble. The 4 Terran tracks of the game are also some of the best music ever composed for a video game ever, period. I've had it playing over a lot of this video, but you should really give it a listen just on its own sometime. It's brilliant, capturing both the optimism of the far future and advanced technology, with the down-home carefree attitude of the people wielding it. The Zerg, meanwhile, are a whole different beast, quite literally. Created by an ancient race known as the Xel'Naga, the Zerg started out life as simple parasitic worms that would burrow into their host's spine and take control of their bodies. Modified by arcane technology, the Zerg experiment grew wildly out of control, allowing them to change the DNA of their hosts and dramatically reconfigure their forms to suit their whims. After gaining sapience through a massive brain-like central intelligence known as the Overmind, this creature lured space-faring life to its planet and assimilated it as well. In a surprise attack, the Zerg defeated and devoured their creators, absorbing the sum total of their knowledge and some of their arcane technology in the process. At this point, the Zerg became aware of a sibling species, the Protoss, and set out across the stars to find the Protoss homeworld and assimilate the Xel'Naga's other experiment. Visually, the Zerg are, in my opinion, the perfect design for a biological swarming race. I don't think the ugly bubble-like designs of Starcraft 2 even remotely hold a candle to the original fleshy design of the Zerg. There's some obvious influence from H.R. Giger here and there, but also the Zerg have an almost demonic look to them, something that I think the development of Diablo heavily influenced in their makeup. The Zerg units also incorporate a lot of visual elements from real-world animals and insects. They're like every cool bug you trapped in a jar to show your friends when you were a school kid, or every lizard and snake you ever stopped to watch crawl around on a hike. Though they're meant to be scary and alien, they're also very grounded and reminiscent of real-life creepy crawlies in a way that a lot of other fictional swarm races like the Flood and Tyranids really aren't. I'll get to the Tyranid resemblance though, but suffice to say I think it's pretty thin at best. Story-wise, the Zerg all share a hive mind, which you would think would not be terribly interesting, but Starcraft plays it a bit unconventionally. Rather than being a dark and nightmarish overlord, the Overmind is instead a kindly and friendly leader to the player character. It's constantly talking them up and encouraging them, congratulating them on victories and hyping them for the next encounter with the enemy. It's a novel idea, and even though you're commanding a horde of evil, all-devouring space bugs, you really feel at home and looked out for by your fellow minions. Finally, we come to the Protoss, an ancient mysterious warrior race possessed of a strong religious background. The Protoss exist in a strict caste system, with the Judicators ruling at the top and the Templar warriors and other beneath them. Side note, for some reason the text-to-speech system really struggles with the word Templar, and it's almost impossible to fix. Uplifted by the Xel'Naga before the Zerg, the Protoss developed into a violent, warring tribal society that entered into a constant period of chaos and strife. After attacking their creators, the Xel'Naga declared them a failure and abandoned them. This left the Protoss race alone to fight a millennia-long civil war known as the Aeon of Strife. Eventually, the Aeon of Strife came to an end when one of their greatest champions, Kas, rediscovered the species' psionic potential and created a shared consciousness that all Protoss could participate in. This ended the civil war, but fomented resentment amongst the more independently minded Protoss tribes who did not want to be constantly subjected to the will of their brethren. This breakaway faction severed their link to the collective and worked to harness a new kind of psionic potential derived from the fundamental forces of the universe. This backfired spectacularly, subjecting the Protoss civilization to destructive energy storms. The outcasts, known as the Dark Templar, eventually fled their homeworld and have continued to live their lives in secret away from the rest of their race. The Protoss have something of a psychic hive mind. Unlike the Zerg, however, it's made up of individuals instead of just plain drones, but in practice it contributes to the rigid system the Protoss inhabit. Low-level Templar warriors fearlessly charge into battle, supported by large armored tanks piloted by those too crippled to fight on foot. Fulfilling many smaller tasks are purely robotic units that form the utilitarian arm of the Protoss forces and take on the less honorable roles such as mining and artillery support. Rounding out the Protoss forces are their powerful psionic units. These units are difficult to master, but when used effectively can be absolutely devastating on the battlefield. It's worth noting though that the AI is a lot better at utilizing the Protoss than most novice and middling human players. Unlike the redneck Terrans and the demonic Zerg, the Protoss are more slow and contemplative. They perfectly capture the vibe of being highly intelligent and experienced but stuck in their ways, made inflexible by years of complacency. While individuals on the ground may be just and honorable, it's clear that their society has decayed into a stifling religious bureaucracy that chokes out new thought and ignores the world at large in favor of monastic isolation. The three races are each distinct in their look, feel, and mechanics. The Terran are considered the most balanced, while the Zerg are the cheapest and the Protoss the most expensive. Each race has a way to recover the health of its units and structures, but also severe limitations to those methods. The Zerg heal slowly over time. Terrans can repair mechanical units and buildings with their workers, and Protoss units have shields over their health that can be replenished from power sources. Terrans are versatile and no nonsense. The Zerg swarm in huge numbers and assault the enemy with gross and dangerous abilities. The Protoss have the most toys, but their forces will always be relatively low in number and slow to respond to attacks. The three races are diametrically opposed to each other, each one never quite having the equivalent to another's units, even if they all have the same general technology tiers. At the same time, they complete each other, each filling a niche in Starcraft's distinct gameplay. Many pixels have been spilled about how derivative Starcraft setting is of existing properties. Warhammer 40k fans charge that Starcraft is a flat-out ripoff of the setting, which, speaking as someone who is now strongly into 40k, I can say is both not true and kinda true. Starcraft does borrow some elements that bear a strong resemblance to things you can find buried deep in the Rogue Trader manual, something else I'll do a video on sometime. Especially Starcraft manual seems to borrow from the setting of 40k, possibly because the manual appears to be written by someone from the UK given the way it spells words like color and centralized. But overall I believe the actual game is just plainly distinct from 40k in pretty much every way, and especially the plot of the game pretty much bears zero resemblance to the grand winding stories of the 40k universe. Another noted influence is the Alien vs. Predator franchise, the comic books, not the terrible movies from the 2000s. It does sort of make sense. The Terrans are obviously influenced by the colonial marines from the movie Aliens.
How do I get out of this chicken shit outfit?
The Zerg are often Gigeresque, and the Protoss have a culture obsessed with war and honor like the Predators. Again, this association is somewhat loose, as each of the three factions dramatically transcends their inspirations, being able to do a great deal more than any of the three depicted actually did in the movies or comic books. The real sources of inspiration for the game stem from the popular media of the time though, particularly ass-kicking sci-fi action movies like Aliens, Predator, RoboCop, Star Wars, Star Trek, The Terminator, and so forth. There's probably even a bit of Rambo in there. The Terran faction also bears some resemblance to the original Starship Troopers novel, and you can find that Terran Marines were even labeled Marauders in pre-release info. The Starship Troopers movie was released only a few months before Starcraft would launch, but it ended up influencing Brood War's new Terran faction, the UED, a great deal. There's also little nods to things like popular anime buried in the map editors, with hero units bearing names like Alan Shetzer and Kukulza. Starcraft is made of these things, but I think unlike modern reference-overdosed media, it manages to be more than the sum of its parts by having its own distinct personality. Overall, you should treat my series like a long-form analysis of the game, its storyline, setting, and at least some of the design stuff. For the rest of the month I plan on uploading at least one mission a week to get through the demo missions. At the end of that period, I'll be uploading a very long green text style reading of all of the storyline and background details in the original manual, which should give any new player a good introduction to the world of the game and might show old players some interesting lore they aren't as familiar with. From there, I plan on maybe doing 1 or 2 missions a month. I'm not sure yet. Some missions will have relatively short videos because I don't have very much to say about them. Others might go on and on if I tangent into related topics or expound on plot threads. Hopefully this series will garner enough interest to make the time and effort that will go into each of these videos worthwhile. If you're new to the game, it's my pleasure to introduce you to it. If you're a long-time player, hopefully I'll say something you haven't heard before. Either way, I'll see you up ahead.